Fulgrim transcendent. We come to a vital crux in the painting process: true metallic, non-metallic. Both of which very fine techniques. Non-metallic gives you the option of building your own reflections. It gives you the option of introducing very nice painterly techniques and maybe elevating the work to a competition style of miniature painting. However, true metallic for me is a lot more suited to the heresy. The heresy is very much grounded in a scale modelling style. It takes a lot of its emphasis, weathering powder, use of airbrushes, that unusual materials, oils, oil streaking. It takes all those influences from military scale modelling, where the aim is to dissolve the barrier between the viewer and the miniature, between reality and the fantasy. Military scale modelling sets out to put you in that world where you're looking up at that Space Marine or that Malkador tank and you can see every little embellishment of it. A little bit of a trouble when you're gazing up at a magical snake man, absolutely. So that's where non-metallic can really come into its own. But for this, I'm using true metallic because not only have I used it throughout my own heresy work, I think it works better with this miniature because you have a lot of polished details and you want to differentiate those details from the metallic chasing on the armor. So that's the reason why we're using true metallic with this. Let's dive straight in, shall we? Let's have a look at the metallics we will be using and let's have a look at painting our magical snake man. First thing we need to do is line out our metallics. We are using silver verde, fine gold, braid gold and murky Maya, all from the Dark Star range. So beyond the technical details of applying paint onto the miniature, all we're doing here is a layering technique. There's not much in the way of tuition I could give you here. It's rather the placement that we need to consider. So this technique, layering, you're simply taking paint from your palette and popping onto the miniature. You can add a little bit of thinner to allow it to flow out a little bit easier, but on the whole, it is simply just transferring thick paint onto your miniature. Now, at the very base coat, we can determine our shadows and highlights. We are adding the fine gold, braid gold, it's the darker gold, with a little bit of murky Maya. This is an ink that will darken down your braid gold to create all these nice shadows. And we can just simply layer those into the shadows. Conversely, we can use the silver verde to be popped straight into those highlights. So at this stage, even though we are simply layering the miniature, our choice of light and shadow placement gives us that beautiful reflective qualities and will set our work apart from other true metallic works. Knowing exactly where to add shadows and highlights can be an issue. I would suggest following the pre-shading path that you determine with your airbrush. You can have a look at the examples up on littlelegendstudio.com. We can have a look at this little spinny Fulgrim. So the light is determined by our primary light source existing above right on the miniature, and everything else is built around that. We built this in our pre-shading phase. Some elements I would like to pick out as particular areas of interest. The big wing on his shoulder pad. So we have, you're not working great. Darker areas up here and lighter, and that goes the same with this eagle wing, where we have the darker areas aren't nearly as big. So lots of dark, lots of shadow, not much in the way of shadow here, because more of the light is striking here. We have more of a silver verde effect on these aspects, wherever light is hitting them. On the teeth, I've made a particular interest point with the silver verde, diving straight into that murky Maya. And then later on in the process, we will be using the braid gold and the, what was the other one? The fine gold to glaze over the top as intermediary layers. So at the outset, we are establishing shadows and light, and then we're connecting them with braid gold and fine gold in and of itself. For the silvers, black diamond is used. I love this color, and we are just simply base coating everything with this. We aren't modulating it with lighter or darker silvers. Everything gets a hit of this. We will be highlighting it later, more importantly with the airbrush phase. That will come much, much, much later on down the line. That will give some really nice dark shadows and an extra dimension. Again, I'm just base coating this, loading up the brush. You don't need special brushes to use true metallic metal, but I would suggest keeping an extra pot of water so you don't mix up the two. It's at this stage we need to stop with the metallics. Later on in the process, we'll be adding a universal shadow through the airbrush, which will help juice up our metallics as well as everything else. But it's at this stage we need to move on to the amethyst armor. We've airbrushed these colors on initially, now it's time to refine them. So we're going to pop them on our palette. We're going to add a couple of new ones. Now the great thing about this color set is that it runs the gamut from warm purple through to mid purple, all the way through to a cool violet purple. And we are going to be spiking this with a little bit of light flesh. And this comes in the term, in the tone of MIG basic skin tone, but indeed any light flesh tone will do. Fulgrim's armor, we've airbrushed these colors on initially, now it's time to refine them. So we're going to pop them on our palette. We're going to add a couple of new ones. Now the great thing about this color set is that it runs the gamut from warm purple through to mid purple, all the way through to a cool violet purple. And we are going to be spiking this with a little bit of light flesh. And this comes in the term, in the tone of MIG basic skin tone. But indeed any light flesh tone will do. The first thing we're going to do when painting the armor is simply locating our highlights. I'm going to take blue violet and add this at the very top specular highlights of Fulgrim. This is a way for my eye to adjust to those very top highlights and give me a focus for any further brushwork. When we consider Fulgrim's abs, they're three-dimensional objects, so they will be reflecting ambient surroundings. They come to a high polish. Not only do we have to deal with the high value of the armor, we also need to consider bounce reflections. In this section, we are using magenta from the Chimera range to add secondary bounce reflections in these areas. And this will sell the effect of a metallic object. And this is again done with a layering technique, building up concise, considered versions of this secondary bounce reflection. The placement really does sell the effect. It really, more than anything else, more than layering, glazing, effective brushwork, just simple light placement does 90% of the work for you. It does help we have a rather nice airbrush layer on here already, but all this is reinforcing what the eye can see at the moment. Once my establishing layers are down, I can add intermediary glaze layers. I mix in a little bit of glaze medium into the paint to help soften the transitions and simply wipe my brush back and forth until I achieve a pleasing blended result. I'll go back and forth on layering and blending techniques until I'm satisfied with the end result. It's at this stage I've established the shadow mid-tone highlight range, ranging from purple in the shadows and royal purple in the mid-tones to blue violet in the highlights. The bounce reflections come in the term of the magenta At this point, I'm swiping back and forth. I'm developing these tones. At all points, the tip of my brush is loaded with paint, and the belly of the brush is loaded with the thinner. So it flows off the brush really nicely, really easily. At all points, I'm trying to drag my paint into the position where I want it to sit. So if I'm developing my highlights, all my brush strokes are moving towards the highlight. If I'm developing my shadows, all my brush strokes are moving towards the shadow. Make sure that the glazes are thin, they're transparent, and you allow each to fully dry before moving on to the next. From here, we need to add satin varnish to each element of the armor. Why? It deepens the shadows of the piece. It gives a satin appearance to them, weirdly enough. You can use satin varnish, or you can use satin medium like I have from the Chimera range. Simply paint it on undiluted and jobs are good. Why are we doing this? Well, we want Fulgrim's armor to have that extra dimension, that extra shine, to differentiate it from things like the ground, the hair, etc., etc. It's that added bonus, that added extra element that we could introduce into our work here that will make it different, that will make it sparkle, that will add authenticity to the viewer. Once this is dry, we do need to reapply our specular highlight, which we do with the blue violet plus a little bit of your chosen light skin. Pop it into the very top, and there we have it, Fulgrim's armor. Now you can stop the video at this stage. We've been through the theory, the construction, and the methodology. From here, we'll be looking at each individual element of the armor plates. But I would advise you stop here, try it on the abs, try it on the body, and then come back and review the rest of the video as reference. Oh, okay, let's relax the rest of this. I got coffee, kind of made my cappuccino. It's just a coffee that I sprinkle hot chocolate on. I'm not sure, what is a cappuccino? I think it's that, right? Okay, we're just gonna chill out for the rest of this and have a therapeutic look at Fulgrim. So to review what we've done so far, airbrushed basic tones, we have really nice soft transitions. Next up, I'm re-establishing those very hard shadows and light. So we have the hard lights in the form of the blue violet plus the light skin tone. Any light skin will do. Any light skin. There's all different kinds of manufacturers out there. Scale 75, MIG, they're all pretty much the same thing. Why a light skin tone? It's not pure white, it's not pure yellow, it's a mix of colors, has a bit of red in there, a little bit of blue, which syncs up nicely with the purple. I found this trick out from a Games Workshop staff member, maybe like 20 years ago, where he was painting harlequins, the classic metal harlequins, and he was highlighting his violet with a skin tone. And I couldn't believe, it was like magic watching. I couldn't believe the colors he was creating with it. He knew something I didn't, and I learned from him, and now I'm teaching you. So I'm placing in my hard shadows, hard lights. Another question you need to consider at this point. Where do I place my shadows? Where do I place my lights? Well, you have the examples here. You have my examples. You have painted artwork from some of the best miniature painters in the world. Simply copy them. Copy where they place shadows and lights. If you want a slightly more evolved answer than that, and by all rights you should, it is the study of light and shadow and how it interacts on different surfaces. Now, there are standalone videos available on the Patreon right now in how light and shadow develop. We take an in-depth look at this on the non-metallic PDFs that we're releasing throughout the months, and that will build into a book. Oh, remind me, I got to talk to you about a book at the end of this. But it's the study of light and shadow on objects. This is a satin, highly polished surface, so I know that my values will be slightly spiked, my shadows will be slightly deeper, and we'll have bounce reflections. I know where my light source is. Mentally, I can map that out. It exists above left on Fulgrim. When it strikes down, everything else develops around that. Of course, Amazon delivery, what can you do? So in terms of value, I'm playing with the structure of the values of this piece, spiking the highlights, deepening the shadows, adding bounce reflections, and then finishing it all off with a satin finish, satin varnish. This methodology stretches across a lot of how I paint. where I'll establish base tones with an airbrush, soft transitions, I'll harden things up with a brush, then I'll introduce glazes later on. It's the methodology that enables me to paint characters and infantry and have them pretty much on par in terms of quality. Determining factor between the quality of the two is time. How much time you have to put into a project, how much patience do you have to develop the micro details of the armor. So a lot of students, when they come to me, especially one-to-one students, one of the big things they mention is that they want to get into competition style miniature painting. It's all well and good, as long as you are willing to set yourself up for the sacrifice of time. The amount of time that you have to spend developing armor plates is much, much greater than infantry. The technical qualities don't change a whole heap. There's not this magical technique that Golden Demon winners are practicing and you aren't. It's just simply the amount of time that you can put into glazing, into transitions, into hardening, into refining, into taking feedback, into developing it. That's the biggest determining factor. It's all the same stuff. It's layering, it's glazing, it's blending, it's stippling, it's texture work, developing it. What separates competition winners or competition painters from hobby painters is just simply the amount of time they're willing to put into polishing their surfaces. Ooh, this shoulder pad area is a nice thing to look at, because light doesn't really affect this area, but you still want to add clarity to these pieces, otherwise it just looks unpainted. So I've added an edge highlight alongside, yes, an edge highlight, a bit of a dirty word in heresy community painting, I know. But you have a lot of filigree here, you have a lot of purple, so I wanted to add clarity in the highlight. So an edge highlight that runs in sync. I'm thinking of the musicians, I guess you call them a boy band, but I'm running it parallel to the lines of the sculpt. And then I'm adding little dots of specular highlights, plural, more than one. If you want good references for this, I can highly advise typing into Google greased up dudes. Get a lot of interest in images doing that, and it's very Fulgrim-esque. The reason you do this is to see how light develops on an ab, on a ripped physique. Of course, I could just look down at myself and see that, take photos of myself, but I won't subject you to that. It looks more like one of Nurglin's creations rather than Slanesh. My wife is a lucky woman. Yeah, that took a weird turn. Okay, the armor, yes. So at the stage, you should have a really pleasing development of gold. The gold is pretty much done at this point. We'll be embellishing it later with that airbrush layer and some murky mire into the shadows again. The silvers will be developed primarily through the airbrush layer and a little bit of work. Where you want to plow the most amount of time into is the armor. The armor, the face, the scales, that's what's going to really sell the paint job to people. Then things like the gemstones are nice to pick out, but you get the armor right, you get the gold right, a lot of the rest of it kind of falls into place. In the next episode, we're looking at the skin, getting that ephemeral, ethereal-esque skin. It'll run pretty similar to this video insofar as that we've built up the base coat. Now we're going to be developing with the brush. We're going to see how transformative those brush layers are to the piece. Voila, Fulgrim transcended. We have done this portion of the metallics and the armor. A lot of the work, a lot of the universal highlights and shadows will come in. A lot of the universal shadows will be placed in later on when we take this little glorious thing. Oh, there's air coming out of somewhere. No. And we're going to be spraying it as a universal shadow to the piece. Until then, I'll catch you next time.